College students, graduates of Reddit, what's the craziest thing you ever witnessed in your dorm, residence hall? Welcome to Total Reddit, keep your eyes on Total Reddit. One of my friends was a crazy hippie. Her and her roommate went in the elevator in the middle of the night, buck naked, with music somehow playing, and they just naked dance around people going up and down the elevator. In my freshman dorm there was a girl who lived alone, was not very attractive and who we never saw with any friends. And she was extremely loud whenever she masturbated. It sounded like humpback whale songs or something. You could hear it just walking down the hall or even in adjacent rooms. And then at some point late in the year it went up a few notches and became much more frequent, like she'd discovered something new. Fast forward to the end of the year as we were moving out and someone said to my roommate and I that they were looking forward to never having to hear her again. That person left and my roommate started laughing. It turned out he was F-king her those last few months under the cover of everyone else presuming that she was just masturbating up a storm. A guy that was wasted and tripping balls went into the wrong room in the middle of the night and was thrown out of said room, across the hall and through the wall into my old room. Turns out there had been a giant hole there that was cheaply patched up years ago, otherwise there should have been no way he could have gone straight through the wall. It was a cold night, but my roommate and I pushed S dresser up to attempt to cover the hole until someone could fix it. Good times. A drunk guy showed up in my dorm room and started to talk on his cell phone near the door, and when we, 4 people in the room, shouted at him to get out he made a sign with his hand like SHHH I'm talking. We didn't let him finish his conversation and kicked him out. Turns out he entered the wrong room. After a few weeks, we were watching a movie when the same guy, drunk, stumbles into the room and gets into a bed, pushing the one staying there out of the bed. He then covered himself with the blanket and tried to get some sleep. We turned on the lights and started filming him, wasted. The next day I showed the video to my co-workers and one of them said the guy was his younger brother, he was in the first year at the university. The video spread on DC++, no torrents there back then, and was on YouTube for a while. Good times. One of my buddies my freshman year did this. And best part was there were a lot of people in our building who were pretty musically inclined, for absolutely no apparent reason, including myself. A lot of us hopped in, played a couple riffs then hopped off again. TI was extremely random but fun as hell. My dorm had a secret Santa thing where your Santa would give you a task to do, and if you completed it, you'd get a gift. In the packed dining hall one night shortly before Christmas break, a huge, hairy, completely naked man jumps onto a table, tucks his junk between his legs, and screams "Daddy only likes me when I'm a little girl." My roommate was his Santa, and as a reward for completing the task, she gave him a teddy bear wearing overalls. Guy down the hall was just nasty. Smelled bad, slovenly, but very friendly. He never went to class. You might be thinking gamer, but nope, he was a day trader. Always told us about his wins, losses for that day. Anyway, this was before mobile devices, and he hardly ever left his computer as a result. Traded in movements of pennies. So he had milk jugs to pee in. He told us proudly about how much time he saved by peeing in milk jugs. I presumed he'd dump them out routinely, but the first time I caught sight of his room I learned the truth. It was as messy as you'd imagine, but then I saw the jugs. All over his room. The floor, windowsill, computer desk. My memory is hazy by now, but I'd say he had at least 21-gallon milk jugs full of piss in his room. To be fair, I couldn't verify that they were all actually full or just waiting in reserve, but at a glance at least some of them were clearly topped off. And honestly, how many gallons of piss is really acceptable to keep in your room? A bunch of guys in my hall collected some masks and dangerous looking items, pocket knives mostly. I think someone had a saw for some reason, and pretended to have tied a dude to a chair with a bag over his head, ketchup for fake blood and everything. They spent half the night on chat roulette with a sign that said tits or he dies. They didn't actually get any tits, but people's reactions were pretty great. That and the time one of the engineers dented a wall by firing a custom Nerf gun he'd built down the length of the hall are my only really crazy stories. Freshman year I had a gay roommate, let's call him Wally. We got along pretty well. We had different social circles but they overlapped a bit so we would hang out on occasion. Wally had game, dude would bring guys back a fair amount and *xyle me but that was fine cause I did the same to him and that's just how it works rights? But eventually, he found a boyfriend. I figured that meant more *xyling for me, but oddly enough, Wally's boyfriend would stay over every now and then but Wally would never text me to ask if I wouldn't mind bailing for a half hour or whatever. Then one fateful night, I awoke to the sound of a creaking bed, and there it was, Wally having butt *x with his boyfriend. Apparently they'd been banging while I was asleep for months, and being a relatively deep sleeper, I was none the wiser. But there it was, my very own Brokeback Mountain. Oh, did I mention that his boyfriend had the same name as me? And when I awoke to find Wally plowing him, Wally just happened to be moaning his boyfriend's name. My name? I awoke to my roommate moaning my name while he gave to his boyfriend doggy style. One guy peed on a cookie sheet and let it freeze outside in winter. He took said frozen sheet of pee and slid it under another guy's door when he wasn't there. All the rooms in that dorm were carpeted. Two things, same dude. We had a guy whose room was at the end of the hall so it had a little extra space next to his door. A little alcove. We had tour groups come through our dorm with prospective students and their families. Well, on one of those days he tore out a bunch of pics from his Playboys and posted them all over his door and on the walls outside his room. He took 3 chairs from the common room and put them outside his room as well. He then had a sign that said the bitches and hoes waiting room. A mother went absolutely ballistic when she saw that. He got into deep shit for it too. A few months later when another tour group came through, our RA Bill, who was a total asshole, was giving kind of a speech to the high schoolers and their families. So our buddy fell out of his room in just his boxers and his hands tied behind his back with a sock in his mouth. He spit the sock out and started yelling, "Bill, untie me. This isn't funny." Our RA was humiliated, the parents went absolutely nuts over it. Our buddy was kicked out later that day. A guy I knew used to hook up with girls and then throw their clothes into the hall outside his room, then lock them out of his room, making them get dressed in the hall in front of whomever was around. I think he works for Comcast now, which fits. Boarding school here. MP3, phones etc. were prohibited, but a few people, including me, still had them. One of them was caught and expelled and all the charging points were covered up. There was one uncovered socket left, but it was 18 feet above ground, and was for a big appliance. The solution we came up with was to steal stuff from the physics lab and make a voltage regulator. Then make 2 stacks of 3 people standing on top of each other. The top 2 guys worked the wires, and got us a connection. One stack went up every day for almost a week before we were able to get a wire extender with a socket and get a permanent connection. It is still the craziest, most innovative thing that I have personally witnessed. Druggy guy down the hall had his druggy girlfriend come visit. Druggy girlfriend ODs in the handicapped bathroom very early the next morning and dies. Edit, more details then. This guy that lived in room 4-14 named Ron had a reputation of selling pills out of his room, antidepressant and anxiety type shit. Near the end of the semester, his girlfriend comes and they have a small party in his room with some other people. The patrolling RA bought pills from him from time to time, so he didn't give them shit. Smash cut to 6 a.m. the next morning, nearly the entire floor wakes up to Ron screaming and paramedics trying to revive his girl. No dice. She had taken a lot of Klonopin, drank a lot of vodka, apparently got sleepy and tapped out. The cops searched his room, arrested him, he got expelled, and he was never heard from again. His roommate then got a single and almost burned the building down trying to make mac and cheese on a camp stove in his room a few weeks later. F. King bonkers. I was a sophomore at University of Iowa, on the engineering dorm. The problem was that the main cafeteria of the campus was downstairs, so drunk people would get confused and wander to it even though it was closed, then start having fun on other floors. It was Saturday night and pretty miserable outside so most people were staying in, when we heard a scream, then a loud crack. When we checked on it, there was nobody in the hallway. There was, however, a large smear of blood along the wall, and the exit sign was broken. One of the guys decided to investigate and found a huge guy in the bathroom, bleeding from the face and drunk. Turns out he had the brilliant idea of running down the hallway, leaping into the air, and headbutting the exit sign. Pull up a chair, it's story time. Across the hall from me lived Ron and Todd, not their real names, but who cares? They were not a good match. Ron was basically a fat hippie, and Todd was on the football team. The funny thing about was that it was Todd who drove Ron crazy, not the other way around. Todd basically didn't care about Ron's antics, but Ron couldn't stand sharing his dorm room with a straight edge. So after a few months, Ron cooks up a plan to get Todd out of the room. And this is how it goes down, based on Todd's story about what actually happened. One night, middle of the night, Todd wakes up. The blinds in the room have been pulled open, and it's light enough to see in the room. Ron is standing in the middle of the room, naked, painting a huge mural on the wall that has the door on it. As Ron moves from area to paint, he skips and quietly sings to himself. Ron also paints himself. Little paint for the wall, little paint for Ron. After 5+ minutes of watching the scene from his bed with growing disbelief and horror, Todd says something, and Ron turns slowly to face Todd, skips over to Todd's bed, kisses Todd full on the lips, and says, "Go back to sleep, Todd, you're dreaming." Todd is just sleepy enough to find this somewhat convincing, so he rolls over. Also, what else is he going to do? Fight his naked, paint-covered roommate? The next morning, Todd wakes up. And there's no mural anywhere in the room. No paint on the floor, no paint on any of Ron's bedclothes, and Ron is fast asleep in his bed, wearing a t-shirt. Todd wakes Ron up and asks if anything odd was going on in their room last night. Ron replies that he had a chem test that wiped him out, so he just came straight home and went to bed and had been asleep until Todd woke him up. So now Todd doesn't know what the fuck to think, but the best answer appears to be that he had a homoerotic dream about his roommate being a painting satyr. So Todd nopes the FK out of the dorm room and gets reassigned. It made no sense to the rest of us either, until much later when we were having a beer in Ron's room. He asked us if we wanted to see something cool. Sure, we did. So he shut off all the lights and then turned on a lamp hidden near his bed, with a black light. All of a sudden, a massive, glowing mural appeared on the wall with the door on it. And all over Ron's sheets and comforter. And Ron just started laughing his fool ass off. And that's how Ron got a room to himself. I lived on the 9th floor of the dorms my freshman year. One wing was males and the other wing females. One of the girls on my floor received a giant, 10+ inch black dildo with a suction cup attachment as a gag gift from her friends on her 19th birthday. The guys on my floor thought it would be great fun to periodically steal, then chase each other around with said dildo and beat the living hell out of each other with it. I was in my neighbor's room one day when his dorm mate busted open the door and threw this thing full force at him. Fortunately my friend was able to react quick enough to dodge out of the way. Unfortunately for us though, the dildo went careening full bore into the window behind him, smashed through it and proceeded to fall 9 stories. We watched in horror and shock as this dildo fell and hit a freshman girl on the head, who immediately collapsed and began convulsing. Cops and paramedics came and took me, my 2 neighbors and the poor girl who owned the dildo down to the campus police station. They put us all into an interrogation room where we waited until a detective came in. With the dildo in hand. He then proceeded to slam down the suction cup end of the dildo onto the middle of the interrogation table. We all lost our shit, we couldn't stop laughing due to the fact that this thing was slowly wobbling back and forth during the whole interrogation. And don't worry, the girl who got conked in the head with this thing was fine in the end. The slip and slide we had on the ground floor was pretty epic, but probably not as epic as this one girl. For some reason she decided to FK 12 guys on her floor and turn the peephole backwards. Reverse peephole Seinfeld style for everyone to see. I'm fairly confident she didn't graduate. One of my friend's girlfriends had a roommate that would masturbate almost every night. She said it sounded like someone vigorously stirring macaroni. I remember the story every time I cook macaroni. Lived in a 21-floor tower, something like 1,600 students lived in it. 4 guys decided to have a jam session in an elevator and go up and down the building, had drums, guitar, saxophone, and vocalist. I think every single floor wanted to murder them. Walked into the shared kitchen to make an easy mac. Upon entering, I see this drunk chick sitting on the edge of a table with a drunk dude standing in front of her. They were talking, but I was way too focused on getting my easy mac on, so I didn't think much of it. I put my wet mac in the microwave and set it for 1 to 2 seconds minutes before strolling back to my dorm. Ding. So I roll back to the kitchen to get my mac, and sure enough, there King. Her skirt was pulled up, her pink thong was dangling from one of her ankles, and her legs were wrapped around his waist. Now this guy wasn't thrusting like he is trying to start a fire down there, but based on the sounds this girl was making, he was giving her exactly what she wanted. I did what any sane man would do. I got my mac, removed the lid, gave it a good stir and checked for hard noodles. Once the quality control was finished, I casually walked down the hall to my friend's room and told him that someone destroyed all of the furniture in the kitchen. He of course wanted to check it out for himself, so as he was walking to the kitchen, I got ready for a great reaction. As he gets to the door, he turns and looks in and says, "Does nothing." He just stares for a solid 15 seconds. I was starting to think they had stopped, then he gave the classic "what the FK" shout and turns with an expression of confusion and satisfaction. My work was done. To this day, that was the most satisfying easy mac I've ever had. One time, my roommate and I hatched quails in our dorm room. We started out with growing plants, then breeding betta fish, and from there we kind of escalated to birds. Ordered a cheap incubator and the eggs online, and kept it in the corner of our room without having any real hope that any of them would hatch. 3 of them did. Somehow. And they lived in our dorm room for a whole year without the RA finding out. Helps that they only grow to be about 3 inches tall. RA here. Seen some shit, but the worst was when I was a freshman. I had this roommate, Mike. Mike was a shithead. Came from money, parents bought him a decently nice car at 16, he modified the shit out of it, he thought he was the shit and he could do anything he wanted. One night, Mike decides he's gonna get very drunk, maybe take some pills. At some point during the night, for a reason we still don't know, he decided he did not like the plate glass window in the hallway of our dorm, so he dropped his shoulder and plowed into it. Spiderwebbed the entire thing. At some point later that night, he wanted to talk to some people we knew on a balcony down the hall. Instead of walking down the hall and into their room, he opened a window and headbutted the screen out so he could lean out and yell at them. At some point later in the night he did cocaine and I woke up to a bunch of my shit duct taped to the wall of our room. I lived on the 5th floor of a monstrous 6-story building. One night in February, the fire alarms went off at like 2 a.m. and the building was evacuated. No fire, no nothing. We all went back inside. The next Tuesday, the alarms went off at the same time. This time someone had taken out the fire extinguishers and thrown them from the top of the stairwells where they exploded when reaching the ground. Obviously, you can't use elevators in a fire situation and the stairwells were a disaster. It wasn't so much fun running through that. This type of thing then happened every Tuesday night for at least a month. They eventually caught the people when they tried to hit 2 dorms back to back. Thanks for watching, don't forget to subscribe, for more updates.